conversation. WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107.
Good morning, my sister. I agree with Themba about the issue of Marcus Euster. As much as the family wants to keep it private, the guy was famous, and he has done a lot of damage to the country. So I think his death needs to be verified. Someone whom we trust needs to go there and verify that this person is really, really dead. There has been some scandals about rich people faking their death. So until someone whom we truly trust as a nation go there and verify that this person is really dead, we remain uncertain about his death as the nation. Thank you.
Good morning, Sis Cathy. This is Matebola. Indeed, the caller is right. I think for Josta, we need to confirm a death certificate. More especially you media. You don't have to undermine that kind of situation. Because since we heard that he has shot himself, no funeral, nothing. Even you say that the family wanted to keep it privately, so it can't be like that. The man was a wanted man through the state. The money that he has destroyed this country through corruption. And then we are told that he has shot himself. And then the media is not even following on it. What is that? Good morning. This is Matebola.
Hey, morning, Cathy. Greta speaking here. Cathy, there is no truth in this world. Patterning the two sections now used to be so our beloved ANC, that is now the first one, President Ramaphosa forces and the RET forces known as the MK party. Aren't they the one who do all these dirty things in the parliament? Aren't they the one who are protecting each other? The one now who are accusing each other? They must take responsibility for wasting this country. Thanks, Cathy Mohlahlana speaking here in Kala.
Yo, guys, I can't stop laughing at that. That's what Friends Are For song that you played after that voice note. That is classic. Andrew Durban.
Hi, Katie and the listeners. Those who are saying that ANC abandoned MK name, they are misinforming us. Actually, MK MVA and MK Military Council merged and they formed MK Liberation War Veterans, which is a structure that is recognized by the Department of Defense and military veterans. So people should never come on radio and misinform us. Thank you.
Hashtag SFM Talking Point.
Well, let's get straight then into our conversation for 10 o'clock. We're going to be looking at election polling and surveys. How does all of this work? And often we'll also hear reports on approval ratings of different leaders of political parties. And it'll be said whoever has retained a high approval rating or the approval ratings have decreased. Well, who is conducting this research? How credible is it, and how seriously must we as the electorate take this research? Let me invite onto the show this morning Lulu White. She's founder and CEO of Elections Consulting Agency of Africa. Lulu, good morning. Thank you so much for... Lulu's not on the line yet, okay? Apologies for that. Terry Zelani, Executive Chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services. Okay, we seem to be having issues with that connection. All right, Gabriel Makin, you are associate at the Social Research Foundation. I understand you are on the line. Good morning, Gabriel.
Good morning, Cathy. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for making time for us and for being part of this conversation. We just seem to be having some technical issues getting our two other panelists connected on the internet connection in particular. So you and I will continue with the conversation. They'll have to catch us while we're on the way. So The issue of polling seems to be one that is growing. I don't think it's a South African phenomenon. In fact, if anything, we can draw trends from what has happened in the US, but it seems to be growing in different parts of the world as well. Why is it that there is this growth and this interest and prominence of election polling or surveying?
So, I think I'd like to start by saying that I think that the South African media has a misunderstanding and oftentimes puts a lot of misconceptions about polling out into their publications. And so I'm hoping through this interview we can start to get through some of those kind of myths or misunderstandings. And the question you raise here actually bridges nicely into that first one, which is it's actually not a new phenomenon that people pay attention to polls. The pollsters in the American elections have been paid attention to for as long as they've been around. And this is, you're looking at 50 to 60 years of having very, very high quality, good polling research done in America. The reason why it feels like it's a new thing in South Africa is that really there hasn't been too many large scale public polls done in South Africa up to this point. But if you look at the developed democracies throughout the world, polling is a very, very well-established part of those democracies. It serves kind of two purposes within democracies. On the one hand, it allows for people to have an understanding of the kind of public opinion and the temperature surrounding any sort of policy issue. And so that allows you to inform key decision makers as to what the voters think should be done in response to an issue. And then on the other hand, you have the kind of showing exactly where the political parties lie. Now, oftentimes what will happen in the media is polls will be treated like forecasts, but polls are not and forecasts are a completely different thing. So somewhere like the Social Research Foundation where I work, what we do is we conduct polls, and the polls give us results that, we ask people who they think they're going to vote for in the next election, and then we have a breakdown which will have the ANC at whatever, say 45%, the DA at 25%, the EFF at 12%. But what we're not saying when we do that is this is what these parties will get. What we are saying is currently, in the time that we conducted the survey of however many South Africans, this is what the read was when we asked these people these questions. In no way are we suggesting at any point this is what the election will look like, because public opinion changes on the daily. It changes as often as an individual human changes their mind, which happens hundreds of times every day.
Thanks for that, Gabriel. I think it's a great place for us to start off from. Terry Tselane, Executive Chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services in South Africa, is on the line as well now. Terry, good morning.
Good morning to you and to your listeners, and thank you very much for having me.
Lulu White, founder and CEO of Elections Consulting Agency of Africa, is also on the line. Lulu, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to the listeners as well.
Yes, and apologies that you had difficulty connecting online, but great to have you on the phone nonetheless. So, Terry, I just want to draw your views just from the perspective of somebody who's watched elections in this country over a period of time. Gabriel says the phenomena of polling is not new. It's not new to the world. It might feel new to South Africa, but it certainly is not the case. Because it has existed for some time, maybe not mainstreamed in the way that we're seeing now. Your view on that? I mean, when you look at the 1994 election, the 1999 election, maybe even the 2009 election, would you say that polling around those elections was at the scale that we see right now in 2024?
No, that's at the same level. Then there is, if, for instance, from 1994, you have had a situation in the country where you had one dominant political party, and therefore the results were almost predictable to the majority of people, and therefore there were not many polls that were actually done to establish how people view different opinions. So you had one dominant political party, one dominant opposition, and it was almost a given that a particular party will operate and then probably poll at a particular level. Now, since 2016, as we may have noticed, you're beginning to see that there are new entrants into the political space, and that the days of one dominant political party are almost over. And as a result of that, it becomes quite important for people to begin to gauge the opinion of people in relation to the elections, ahead of the elections, so that they can make up their minds in one or another in relation to the way they view the polls, and then how they think that information would actually assist them going forward.
One of the things, Lulu, is that the polling, depending on who has produced it, is quite different. And the mixed messaging from polls seems to also create a level of confusion for us, the consumers of that information.
That is correct. And I think that is why in the most you find a lot of analysts are really skeptical when it comes to gauging what the polling, what polling companies do provide, because one gets the sense that there is a bit of bias in the whole exercise of polling. And some of the questions that you ask yourself, for example, observing, would be, where exactly, did they take this poll? If somebody says they did a poll in an urban area, at which point do people go to rural areas? You never get any sense in the polling also of the areas. It's always around urban areas. It's always, or peri-urban areas. It's always around young people or certain demographic. So you never, and that is the reason why the results come out so significantly different to what was predicted before an election. I understand when the gentleman says that it's because people's minds, change their minds regularly. But when it comes to voter choice or political party choice during an election, generally South Africans, there is an understanding of more or less where they will be going in terms of their choices. So the changes are not that significant. If they had to go back to the same places that they polled post-elections, then they'd find that the people that they said they'd vote for, they voted for. But the differences in those come as a result of the fact that other areas and other demographics had not been considered in the poll. So when the result finally comes and the result captures everybody else, it produces a completely different outlook as opposed to when it was polled.
One of the questions, Gabriel, that I've seen come out of just the reactions to, again, some of the polling that has been done so far is the question of how voters begin to make sense of these polls. And as somebody who's working in the space of producing some of these surveys, how would you say we need to make sense of it? How do we contextualize them?
So I think that's a very important question, and I think some of the statements that Lulu just made show the kind of misunderstandings that people have about polls. The fact that you can see, for example, an Ipsos poll have completely different results to us is in large part due to the different methodologies that are employed. One of the classic kind of mistakes that get baked into polls is, depending on what what methodology you employ, you will find that you have certain type of biases in your results, and if you employ another, you will get different biases. So a good example to just for listeners to think about is in terms of the way that polls are conducted, is a couple of very big questions. Firstly, the first question you should need to answer is, are you going to do face-to-face polling or are you going to do telephonic polling? Now, face-to-face polling, the kind of arguments in favor of that are the interviewer has much more of a personal touch with the interviewee, and it might make the interviewee feel more comfortable in divulging how they really feel, because there is the case, and in part, and you have to always take into account that sometimes when a strange person asks you an important political question, people might not feel comfortable in answering that question. And so maybe face-to-face interviews makes people more comfortable. The problem is with face-to-face interviews, especially in South African society, is when they're conducted, a huge swath of the middle class and the urban middle class are busy. And so you end up undersampling them. And so we have cases in which you'll see some polling organizations undersample the urban middle class, and you get results that are skewed in that way. And then on the other hand, we as an organization use telephonic polls. And as Lulu pointed out, it becomes harder to get to rural voters with telephonic polls. We spent almost a month in KZN, for example, trying to get into the rural areas, just because it is very difficult to find necessarily all parts of rural South Africa using a telephone. But at the same time, you get a much better coverage of, for example, the urban middle class. And so it depends exactly on what you're willing to give up. And then the other thing that I think is kind of important that we talk about is that polls aren't ever trying to say that the results we have are the exact reality. So whenever you conduct a poll, depending on the sample size of your poll, there will be a certain degree of margin of error. So for example, we conducted a poll of 815 voters in the Western Cape in March of this year. We finished about a week and a half ago with that poll. 815 voters is a very small sample size, which means we have a margin of error of 5%, which means that for every number that gets put out in a report about our polling, the numbers could vary 5% up and 5% down. If you take into account margin of error when looking at polling results, you suddenly start to understand that if you say, for example, I think that this DA number is too high, it feels wrong to me and it feels like it's biased in favor of the DA number. Okay, let me apply a 5% margin of error and take it 5% down. All of a sudden, these results seem a lot more reasonable. And you can do that varying up and down. And so you should never look at polls and the numbers that come out of polls as the kind of, this is exactly what it is. You need to take into account that due to the nature of the research, there is an imperfections baked into polling.
Yeah.
And so margin of error is the way you account for that. And so there's no perfect way of doing a poll. And so you need to understand how these things can vary from one side to the other, which is what produces these results.
Of course, Gabriel, the reality is that often most people don't have time to get into the full research, right? What people read is a summary of the findings. And that's if they even are reading that summary directly from the source. And so how this surveying is often positioned is just based on its outcomes and not really getting into the nitty-gritty of some of some of what we've just outlined.
I agree with that completely, but that doesn't mean just because the reporting of polling is bad does not mean that the polling itself is bad. If you know, it's kind of, it's almost as if you were to say, you know, um, you've done great work, but because the person telling me about your work misrepresented it, therefore your work is actually not good. So there's a burden of responsibility that falls upon the people that report on the polling to actually outline this to the voters so that they can understand exactly what it is and where the use of polling is. And that's why I started the conversation by saying I think that there's been a lot of misrepresentation in the media, which kind of comes out of a misunderstanding. I agree, it's quite difficult and quite technical to get into the nitty-gritty, and it does help, for example, that I do have a statistically trained background, and so I understand how you produce margin of error and understand the influence of sample size. And so, but taking all of that into account, I would say that the best response then is to hold the media to a higher account when it comes to reporting on the polls.
All right. Okay. We're going to continue the conversation in a moment. It's 10:30. Time for the latest news headlines.
Good morning, Cathy. With your news headlines, I am Luyanda Maume. Limpopo police say 4 people have been shot dead in a taxi-related violence incident in Zabediela outside Leboagomo. The deceased are 2 taxi operators, a passenger and a passerby. The exhumation of the body of Justice Setshwantsho, the husband to Agnes Setshwantsho, has started in the Saneng village outside Mahikeng in the northwest. This after police were granted an exhumation order. An ANC national spokesperson Mahlengi Pengumutsiri says they will continue to fight for the legacy of the party. She was speaking to the media outside the Durban High Court, where the ANC is seeking an interdict against the MK party, challenging the party's use of the logo and name. I'll have details on this and other stories at 11. Cathy has your SAFM market update.
The rand is currently trading at 18 rand 94 to the dollar, 23 rand 91 to the pound, and 20 rand 50 to the euro. Markets in Asia closed mixed. The JSE is mainly weekend mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are flat this hour. Gold is trading at $2,180, platinum $904 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $85.40 a barrel.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We're looking at polling in South Africa and how to better understand election polls. My guest for this morning, Gabriel Makin, who is an associate at the Social Research Foundation, Terry Tselane, executive chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services in South Africa, and Lulu White, who's founder and CEO of Elections Consulting Agency of Africa. So, Terry, I hear what Gabriel is saying about the reporting on polling, that perhaps sometimes doesn't fully contextualize, doesn't fully explain the issues of margins of error and sampling, etc. But of course, there has been a broader debate, and I think it's been global, in that there have been questions asked about the way in which even the surveying and the sampling of polling takes place. So, for instance, how the question is phrased can have a bearing on, the sentiment that is expressed and ultimately then the result of the poll. Do you think that there is a level of responsibility that those who produce polls do have around how they position their polling too?
Absolutely. I think you are right. There is that responsibility on their part. And I was listening to that very intensely because the issue of methodology and the transparency around the methodology is so important, because most of the time when people are exposed to those polls, they only see the end result and then begin to accept that as though that's how political parties are going to be performing. Even if you take in consideration the margin of error that he is referring to, there is still a misunderstanding, because If there is no transparency around the methodology, then it is possible for people to make mistakes and accept that as though it's going to be a true reflection of the way political parties are going to be performing. So the responsibility is not only in terms of the media, but in terms of the pollsters themselves to make sure that upfront they indicate the kind of methodology that they have used. Because once you know the methodology, it is much more easier to understand how they arrive at a particular conclusion and whether to trust or not to trust that conclusion.
You're bringing me into my next question, Terry, which is really a question of credibility, right? People want to be able to know whether they can trust what is being said by these surveys as true. And I accept that most polling companies will say this is an expression of sentiment at a particular time. Gabriel says that it's not a forecast, but again, it's not how people see it. It's not how it's received.
Definitely, the majority of people. In fact, now the political parties are also beginning to use polls as part of their management of their election strategies. So it is therefore important because sometimes opinion polls can also shape the opinion of voters, because if the majority of people begin to think that a particular party is performing badly, they might actually begin to think or rethink about their continued support of them. And then hence, now this suspicion around certain polls to say, depending on where these people are coming from, this has actually been manipulated in order to be able to prop up an image about a particular political party. So that's what I'm saying. The issue of transparency becomes quite important in terms of making sure that we understand the methodology that was used to arrive at a particular opinion poll.
Lulu, do you think the question of the influence that polls have on voters is one that we as South Africans have grappled with enough? In the US, we all remember that 2016 election and how the pollsters got it so wrong. There were lots of debates in the aftermath of that touch on some of the issues that have been spoken about today. And there seems to be an acknowledgement of the fact that there is some kind of influence that polling has on the electorate. But are we at a point where, as a country, we have grappled with that simply because, again, the polling from a national perspective has never been as wide scale as we're seeing now?
I think, look, it's true that polling can shape public opinion in terms of how people view certain political parties or certain candidates. Yes, polling is relatively new in South Africa, and interestingly enough, it's young people and professionals that actually, and like they said, people in urban areas that seem to have a bit of an interest in polling, and that's why I think even when the questions come and all that, and the integrity of polling is being questioned, it's mainly those people in those areas that question it, because there is a significant interest, because obviously these are people that watch this. Would it be enough to influence South Africa on a grander scale? I don't think for this particular election it's something that can. I do think, just to also reiterate what Terry was saying, that it's very important that because of issues around credibility and the margin of error that people need to understand, the methodology needs to be transparent, and the data also needs to be, it needs to be easy to interpret, because the reality is that it does have a form of influence. I mean, we see it all the time on social media. You see it on polling on social media, and you can see the effect of that on social media. Yes, as you go throughout the country in other rural areas or it's a bit slow on the uptake, but it does have influence, and it is something that polling companies and such, and I understand Gary when he talks about the media, that the media also needs to be held accountable, but polling companies themselves also need to start being held accountable with some of the data that goes out, because polling can actually influence a public opinion, whether negatively or positively.
Lulu, what you're saying, I think, really ties into my next point, which is about, I guess it goes back to the question of credibility and trust in these polls and surveys, but it's about the interests that these organizations serve, because there now are questions about, okay, so if a particular group has released polling, the other question that must be asked is, who has commissioned this polling? Is there transparency around that? Because that in and of itself could well be an influence that results in bias or results in it being skewed in a particular way.
Exactly. I think, and also that is where you find, even when the polling stats and those results are being questioned, it's always around that to say, who has commissioned this polling? And one way or another, we can argue whichever way, but one way or another, a lot of companies are likely going to be a bit more biased with the company that commissions them. And that is where the question of credibility and transparency and the interpretation of what is being presented comes to the fore, because people are then saying whoever is paying this guy is obviously driving a particular agenda, and we are not going to entertain that agenda. So that's why it is very important, the transparency of the methodology of who is commissioning, and it must be interrogated so that when the results are out and they're interpreted, people have a proper understanding and a proper background of the purpose of that particular poll.
We'll continue the conversation in a moment, and I'll also give Gabriel an opportunity to weigh in on this question of commissioning, because, of course, many of these organizations will say that they have their own checks and balances in place to deal with the perceptions of bias, regardless of who the client may be. I'll also take your calls and contributions to this conversation. 086 000 2032 is the number to dial, 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, 0614 104 107. What do you make of some of the polling that has come out so far? Do you find these surveys to be credible? How seriously do you take the not projections, but how seriously do you take the findings that they make? Even though they say they're not projections, right? It's sort of very difficult to see it as not being a prediction of what then a possible election outcome might be. So we'll do that after this quick break.
The Blues are looking for nothing but victory to cement a decent top half position.
Mudryk takes over. Mudryk's through. Mudryk round the goalkeeper. Oh, it's fantastic.
But the Clarets need full points to step out of the uncomfortable zone.
Come on, Jakob. Jakob Brun-Larsen scores. Burnley. Perfect penalty. Keeper went the right way. Too much on it.
This is the Premier League. Witness the superb contest between Chelsea FC and Burnley FC on Saturday, 30 March at 4 p.m. live on S3. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. # We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Remember to tune in tomorrow when we'll be announcing the name of the winner in the Outsurance Easter competition. Even if you miss the deadline for entries, Outsurance could still help you uncover possible savings on your car insurance. If they can't beat your current premium, ask for 500 Rand. Claim free and with the same insurer for 3 years, ask for 1,500 Rand. SMS out to 30754 for a quote. That's out to 30754. Licensed insurer and FSP, T's and C's online.
Those who love the beautiful game can never have enough of the incredible moments. Like the fascinating last-minute goals, the unbelievable saves, the top-of-the-range reviews of critical match scenarios by the legendary Mr. Ref, the mummies of the week, and highly knowledgeable analysts. Catch Soccer Zone on Mondays at 8 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC 1 at 10 p.m. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Fly better to your next holiday. Book your flights with Emirates to a holiday in Dubai, London, Istanbul, or Paris. Look forward to delicious regionally inspired cuisine, enjoy free-flowing premium drinks, and relax to your favorite movies on the way. Because it's not just about the destination, it's how you get there. This year, fly Emirates. Fly better.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. For Citizens Corner today, we're looking at election polling. How can we better understand some of the surveying that has been taking place? And I'm sure we're going to see more and more of it, of course. It can create a great deal of confusion, especially for people that are then having to make sense of the mixed messaging that is coming out of the polling. Lulu White, Terry Tselane, and Gabriel McCain are our guests for this morning. Gabriel, I want to just give you an opportunity to respond to the issue of commissioning before I take some of our listeners.
I've got an incredible amount to respond to. I think that just before we went to break, the way that you phrased it is kind of indicative of the problems that we see here. You know, there's this discussion that you guys have had about the kind of biases and the problems that arise from polling. But it's not, but as Terry acknowledged, as soon as you understand methodology, sample sizes, you understand that this bias starts to fall away. The problem is when people start to say the polls are something they're not. So when you go to break and you say these predictions, oh wait, they're not predictions, but it's very hard for them to not look at predictions. They aren't predictions. You mustn't treat them like predictions. These are the current public opinion. Public opinion is always subject to change. And so when a poll is done, it simply is a snapshot of the moment. And so the fact that polls have mixed messages is a reflection of the fact that public opinion changes on the daily basis. And so it isn't mixed messages necessarily. And so what you should be doing with polls is look for trends. Okay, we see now in current polling that the ANC is far down. It's very difficult to not acknowledge that. You know, if the ANC got 57.5% in the last election, they're now polling in most polls at close to 40%. There is no denying that this means that the ANC's on a downward trend. Similarly, the DA looks to be trending upwards. It's not a reflection of bias in favor of the DA that the DA in most polls receives more than it did in the, let's say, 2019 election. It's a indication of the fact that public opinion in the country has changed. You also made a claim, which I have a problem with, which is a claim that the media loves to use to try and discredit polling, which is that the polls got the American 2016 election wrong. The American 2016 election, the popular vote was won by Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump got 46.1% of the vote. Hillary Clinton got 48.2% of the vote. Every poll that was done a day before had that basically as the outcome. YouGov said Donald Trump 45, Clinton 49. Bloomberg, Trump 43, Clinton 46. Fox, Trump 44, Clinton 48. Monmouth, Trump 44, Clinton 50. Ipsos, Trump 39, Clinton 44. Wall Street Journal, Trump 43, Clinton 48. Once you see that, and then you take into account margin of error, they didn't actually get the American election wrong. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. But because of the Americans' electoral system, Donald Trump won the election. it's not the fact that the poll there was no poll that misrepresented it. In fact, the polls would be wrong and would have been wrong if they said that Donald Trump would have won the popular election. And so you see here, this is a problem of representation. You need you keep trying to pass responsibility back onto the pollsters, but if the media keeps repeating the same mistakes around polling and keeps repeating the same myths around polling, there's not much that the pollsters can do. What we're doing is basically the same as what people in a university do who conduct any sort of research.
So the challenge, Gabriel, is that the surveys that are done are not all done using the same lens. They're not using the same perspective. And so this idea that there are no messages...
But surveys don't have a perspective or a lens. Research like that, you have a list of questions in which an interviewer asks an interviewee.
But how a question is formulated can very much influence the response that somebody gives to that question. And the way in which some questions are formulated can also be biased. And sometimes you have individuals that are conducting surveys, they don't even want to release the questions of the nature of questions that they were asking those that they were surveying.
Well, one of the ways that for example, we as an organization deal with that bias is we will ask the same question in multiple different ways. We'll phrase it differently, and then we will, when we release a report surrounding that question, for example, we will release the various ways in which the question was asked. And so once you kind of start to understand that these things, it's impossible for us to release all the data that we have. There's that one, it's our proprietary information, and two, it's not very simple to digest. We have hundreds of thousands of data points. We break down every question by 10 plus different demographics. And so the fact of the matter is that some things will have to be excluded, and when reporting on it for making it easier for the public to understand. You see, but the problem always seems to come back to, well, you guys need to make the public understand exactly where it is. Well, if you were to, for example, take one of the Social Research Foundation reports, you would see that in the very beginning, we outline the methodology that we employ, we outline margin of error. We then show the graphs, and then our tentative conclusion section is literally just repeating what the data shows. And nowhere at any point in that process has there been any sort of attempt to misrepresent, to change ideas that the public opinion shows. And so the only problem is you keep suggesting that there's bias, but the only bias that comes in is natural bias that occurs in the research.
It's not something that I keep suggesting, Gabriel. I asked what is a very valid question, which is the question around the issue of bias, which again is a question that so many companies have had to answer in the aftermath of polling that they have produced. It feels that you are offended by the question is something I don't understand, because it's a fair question to ask. If somebody has commissioned...
I'm not offended by the question.
If somebody has commissioned content, how do we ensure that whatever is produced out of that research is not biased? It's a valid question.
Well, that's impossible to say. Every piece of research that is ever conducted by any research organization will be biased. The problem that I have is the suggestion that, the way that you imply that the people commissioning the survey have biases. But the thing is that biases within research come from the methodology you employ. If you are actually conducting legitimate research, it doesn't matter who funds it. What matters is the way that the research is done. That is what defines bias. And so the problem that I have here in the way that you're kind of phrasing these questions is it implies that there's some sort of way that a human can artificially add bias. Now, I'm not here saying that, of course, that never happens, that people don't try to misrepresent findings and stuff like that. But at the same time, really, what bias is in research that is conducted in survey research are artifacts of the way in which you conduct the research. They're statistical things. They aren't placed in there by the people conducting the research. It's how it's done produces the biases.
And Gabriel, the point that you're making is a valid point, but it's not true for every organization. And we have had examples of that. But I want to also give our listeners an opportunity to weigh in on this conversation rather than just have this debate between the two of us, because I think that we're coming at it from different angles. Mr. Mashile, you're out in Bushbuck Ridge. I also understand that you're a former MP. Good morning, sir.
Morning, and morning to Terry and Gabriel. My input on this particular matter is, let me start accepting what Terry has indicated, that in the early 1990s, after our democracy, then all these polling companies did not have any interest because they could not influence the elections, because it was obvious that the African National Congress at the time then was actually enjoying maximum support. But the fact remains that when we started having challenges of Jacob Zuma as the president, then we started seeing these polls being done and released time and again. Because one will then believe that people were using the period to try and actually send messages. It is correct. Gabriel may not accept what you are raising. The fact of the matter is that there are many issues that brings in biases. The timing of the poll, the kind of people that are actually talking to those that they are asking questions. You can imagine if a white person goes to the rural areas and asks those questions to rural people, then you have got a problem. Then the timing, if a poll is commissioned at the time when a particular political party has got some issues with communities or in the public domain that are negative, you commission a poll. But if that particular party goes over that and actually have a positive response in the public, you commission another poll. The result will never be the same. But one thing for sure is that even if Gabriel says it is not a projection, but unfortunately they remain a projection because they do it ahead of elections. And there is the intent of actually communicating a message that at the time of elections, this is the kind of things that you will expect. And again, of course, I think he agrees that when you have got a poll now and you have a poll 3 weeks down the line, then when you compare the two polls, they give you a trend, which is actually a projection. And I think he just needs to understand and agree on those things and not be too much theoretical.
All right. All right, Mr. Mashile, thanks for that call. Look, I don't think that he necessarily has to agree. He's entitled to have his view. Lulu, let me bring you in here just on this issue of the forecasting versus it being a prediction of the outcome. Because often what it says is, well, based on who we surveyed in September, if this election were to take place on the day that we surveyed, this would be the likely outcome. Much of, again, we can say it's a reporting issue. Much of how it's reported on is that, well, this is what we can expect. This is what we can anticipate. How do we see it as a snapshot of what is likely to happen, but also then in the same breath not see it as a prediction?
I think we can't not see it as a prediction as much as we would like to not see it as a prediction, because both these methods actually predict the outcome of what's going to happen in an election. While we understand the significant differences that Gabriel is talking about when he says that polling is about taking a sample of the population to gauge what the public thinks, and we understand that, and that forecasting would look at data, so it analyzes the data around what is happening for that particular period of that particular election. But the bottom line is, at the end of it all, it gives a predicted outcome of what the election is all about, right, or what is going to happen in the election. So it becomes very difficult to not then see it as a forecast, because both of them at the end of the day, they arrive more or less at the same thing. So it becomes, like I said, it becomes difficult, and I don't know. I think what Mr. Mashile has just said is very key, to say perhaps it should not only, perhaps the credibility around polling would be better if it was not only focused when it is only election time. If it could be if a snapshot of what is happening in the country, to gauge what is happening in the country, could be something that happens generally throughout, so that by the time you get to election season, you are able to have a fair understanding and give us a fair analysis of what the mood of the country is at that particular time. Now, I understand that perhaps that is not something that is possible, because obviously it's an expensive exercise to actually poll. I also feel that while I understand as a professional where Gabriel is coming from, I do think that this is something that perhaps not only the organization but all companies, the Ipsos that work with such data, I do hope that this is something that they can take perhaps in their stride. And this is perhaps a learning curve, because all of us are essentially giving the same opinion, to say it does appear that there is a bit of bias that is attached to the polling exercise. And this is something perhaps that polling companies need to look at and find a way of going around, so that it removes that image, because perception is perception is more powerful than fact. How people perceive something is how people generally think it's the truth.
All right. I've got to go to the 11 o'clock news, Gabriel. I'm happy to give you a chance to give your parting shot on the other side of the 11 o'clock news update.
So my boss thought he must exercise to get rewards. He could just pay with his Nedbank Amex card and earn up to 2% unlimited cashback and get up to 30% off on flights without breaking a sweat any day of the week.
And you get even more rewards on a Friday, because
Thank Greenbacks is Friday.
That's right. Get rewarded with Greenbacks. Join Nedbank today. See money differently. Nedbank. We're an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. T's and C's apply.
Yanga have a massive mission to dish out orders in Dar es Salaam against 2016 champions. However, Masandawana believe in their ability to succeed anywhere on African soil. This is the first leg quarter-final encounter of the CAF Champions League. Witness Africa's beautiful game. Young Africans versus Mamelodi Sundowns on Saturday, 30 March at 8 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
Stay tuned to SAFM coming up.
Thank you, Cathy. In your top stories, Limpopo Transport condemns taxi-related violence, and a hearing challenging MK party insignia underway. This is SAFM News. A very good morning. I am Luyanda Maume. Limpopo's Transport Department has condemned the taxi-related killings in Zabediela near Leboakgomo. 4 people, including a passenger and a passerby, were killed in the shootings this morning. The cause of the taxi killings is unknown. 2 weeks ago, a taxi operator was also shot dead in the area. Batseba Mabua reports.
Transport and Community Safety Department says the taxi killings undermine the government efforts to create peaceful and reliable transport system. The details of the deceased two taxi operators, a passenger and a passerby, have not yet been divulged. The passenger and a passerby were caught in a crossfire. MEC Razilani has urged police to arrest the perpetrators. Batseba Mabua, SABC News in Polokwane.
Back in Gauteng, motorists are advised to avoid the N12 West in El Dorado Park in the south of Johannesburg. This follows a foiled cash-in-transit robbery. The crime scene has been cordoned off and police are at the scene. JMPD spokesperson Xolani Fihla has called on motorists to make use of alternative routes.
N12 West in El Dorado Park is currently closed off to traffic and vehicles are being diverted at Golden Highway, and this is due to attempted cash-in-transit heist near Klipspruit Valley Road, K43, and it's understood that no money was taken. Due to the crime scene and the processing of the scene by the South African Police Services, the N12 West Freeway has to be closed off and motorists are urged to avoid and to use Golden Highway as an alternative route.
It is widely expected that the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee will leave the repo rate unchanged at 8.25% when it announces its decision this afternoon. Most economists expect that domestic consumer inflation to ease below the current 5.6% later this year. However, the upside risks remain a concern. Economists say they also expect interest rates to begin going down in the second half of the year. Chief economist at Answisa Advisory, Mielani Mkhabela, explains.
For the March MPC sitting, we expect a repo rate hold as a result of inflation being managed to be in between 5.10 to 5.20%, which it will have dropped from the past MP sitting where it was sitting at 5.30.
The Hawks have arrested a former Hunter municipal manager who is currently a municipal manager at Namakoi municipality in Springbok in the Northern Cape this morning. The 63-year-old man is facing fraud and contravention of the Municipal Finance Management Act charges. He is expected to make a brief appearance before the Calvinia Magistrates Court today. The exhumation of the body of Justice Setshwantsho, the husband of Agnes Setshwantsho, has started in the Disaneng village outside Mahikeng in the northwest. This after police were granted an exhumation order. Justice Setshwantsho passed away in 2015 of what was believed to at the time to be of natural causes. His family, however, raised suspicion that he could have been murdered after his wife was arrested last year for killing her niece and then claiming millions of rands in insurance claims. Kagiso Kipupele is in Disaneng.
Families and relatives of Justice Setshwantsho, accompanied by community members, have gathered outside the cemetery as police and forensic pathologists are exhuming his remains. Setshwantsho died in February 2015. Agnes, who is currently standing trial for murdering her niece, is also suspected of killing her son, Kutlo, in July. His remains were also exhumed in Kurumane last month. Agnes Setshwantsho is expected to appear in the Molopo Magistrate Court tomorrow. Kagiso Kipopele, SABC News, Disaneng.
And let's conclude with some election-related news. Now, the ANC's legal counsel has sought to highlight the historical links that have existed between the governing party and the Umkhonto weSizwe name. Advocate Kevin Marriott says the goodwill of the name is with the governing party. The ANC has hauled the MK party to the Durban High Court over its use of the MK name and accuses the new party of being in violation of Section 34 of the Trademark Act. That is, the unauthorized use of which the trademark is registered is identical or closely resembles the trademark as likely to be used or deceive or cause confusion. Marriott says the history of the ANC and Umkhonto weSizwe and its formation are an indication of the way the military wing was under control of the ANC.
His idea was that a military movement should be a separate and independent organ, linked to the ANC and under the overall control of the ANC, but fundamentally autonomous. And that is the position, and there are two important elements of it. First is the link to the ANC, and the second is under the control of the ANC. And that is why we submitted that the goodwill that vests in the Nkontwe Sizwe name and mark vests in the ANC, because it was the organisation that always exercised control over the actions of Nkontwe Sizwe.
Recapping your top story, Limpopo's Transport Department has condemned the taxi-related killings in Zabediela near Leboakgomo. 4 people, including a passenger and a passerby, were killed in the shootings this morning. For SAFM News, I am Luyanda Maume. Headlines at 11:30.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide.
When TP Mazembe and Pedro de Luanda collide, the vibration will shake the city of Lubumbashi in the DRC and the capital city of Angola. This is the first leg quarter-final contest of the CAF Champions League. Witness Africa's beautiful game, TP Mazembe FC versus Pedro de Luanda FC on Saturday 30 March at 3 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
The SABC TV Licenses Winner Holiday Experience competition has finally come to an end. And we are pleased to announce that Thabo Batye is the overall winner, who will be jetting off to Coachella in April with his girlfriend.
I don't even know what to say.
Thabo entered the Winner Holiday Experience with SABC TV Licenses competition last year when it was running between 1 September and the 15th of December. He simply paid his TV license while he was at his grandmother's house in Kimberley, and he was hoping to win a PlayStation at the time. Little did he know that he would win the grand prize to either Coachella or the Bundesliga in Germany. Thabo obviously chose Coachella. Congratulations, Thabo. You are proof that paying your TV license really is the right thing to do. SABC TV Licenses. Pay yours. Make a difference.
Coming up on the book reading, Why Men Had Women.
The use of violence to ensure that these aims were achieved was part and parcel of that centuries-old history. These governments simply could not be trusted, of course. The reality of oppression and cruelty could not remain out there, only touching the surface of our skins. The historical lack of trust in the whites who governed, or rather misgoverned us under duress, would seep into our interiors. And so our psychosocial relationships with the whites were solid.
Catch the book reading on SFM Monday to Thursday at 11:45 on The Talking Point.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're listening to The Talking Point. Welcome to the final hour of the show. So coming up in this hour, we're going to be looking at the Alderman SA Trust Barometer for 2024 and some of the findings of that particular research. Of course, they've been tracking the question of trust for 24 years. We'll be joined by the CEO of Edelman Africa in a moment. Before we get into that conversation, I just want to wrap up our conversation from the previous hour, which was looking at the issue, the question of polling and how we understand polling and how we can begin to make sense of polling, especially the different outcomes that different surveys will have and the impact that it has, especially in the lead up to an election. So Gabriel Macken is an associate at the Social Research Foundation. Gabriel, we didn't have a chance to give you an opportunity to give you a parting shot. All right, it looks like we've lost Gabriel there. All right, apologies for that. It looks like we've lost Gabriel on the line. So I guess that's where we leave it with that particular conversation. You've sent quite a number of voice notes, just also responding to the issue of polling. We'll take some of those voice notes and then get into our final conversation of the day.
Cathy, it's Tsepo here. You sound as if you're saying
there's a type of research that doesn't have biasness. There is no research that doesn't have biasnesses. All researches have biasnesses. You just have to minimize it. So it's how they minimize research. It's not that research doesn't have, research won't have biasness. It will. All researchers have biasness. It's just that it has to be managed, minimized. That's it.
Gabriel is confusing us with facts because it seems as if he doesn't want pollsters to take any responsibility for what people perceive their polls as. Because obviously, what is the point of doing a poll if you don't want to understand what are the people's sentiments about certain parties? Because it seems as if this polling thing is for fun. We mustn't read anything to it.
Hi, Cathy. Polls are very good for democratic countries where the electorate is free to express what they want and their perceptions. But the problem is with repressive regimes, polls work the other way around. Then it becomes known that they are not wanted anymore or they are not favored by the people anymore. And then they go and they can traumatize the voters so that they change, not democratically, but by force.
Good morning, Cathy, and the listeners. Cathy Mohlahlana from Polokwane. The issue around the polling, my view is simple. Polls are just used as one of the ways to induce regime change in South Africa, to persuade, an ordinary voter into believing in the outcome of the polls that are, narrow-minded, and they seek to achieve one outcome, which is to persuade voters to vote otherwise, and vote otherwise that vote any other thing but not the ANC, so that they can induce regime change. So they are part of the regime change propaganda narrative, and they are used to exactly that. They are not objective, and they are part of that propaganda. So we should really take them with a pinch of salt. Actually, I frown on them.
#SFM Talking Point.
You're listening to The Talking Point. Thanks for those WhatsApp voice notes. Yeah, I don't know if we can say that polls are necessarily propaganda or a tool for a regime change, because we've seen they can have an opposite effect depending on what the context in which they've been commissioned is. So the question is not about whether or not we should have polling. There's no reason why we shouldn't have polling, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's really about saying, given the fact that they have become such a popular tool and such a big aspect of political campaigns, how do we, as the electorate, as the consumers of that content, how do we better understand it for ourselves? How do we better make sense of their results so that we put them in their right context? All right, the final conversation for this morning, we're looking at the Trust Barometer results for 2024. I'm joined by Karina Creera, who's the CEO of Adelman Africa. Karina, good morning to you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and hi to your listeners. Thanks so much for having me.
Nicoli Kubanali is the CEO of Mobile Applications Laboratory. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
So, Karina, you've been running this Trust Barometer for 24 years. You've been tracking the issue of trust. Firstly, how does one track an issue like trust? How do you measure what trust is?
Thanks, Cathy. Well, we have a very intelligent data and insights team that do this research for us. A proprietary tool and methodology that we use to measure trust in the exact same way every year. And effectively what we're doing is we're testing the levels of trust in various societies around the world, 28 markets now, to look at their levels of trust across the four main institutions in a society, so that being business, government, NGOs, and the media. And we believe that trust is really built around two key pillars. that being both competence and ethics. And we know that trust is a really important capital that any institution can have with their stakeholders. So if we're able to measure that society is feeling that they trust that an institution has both the competence and the ethics to deliver and to do their job in society, we know there'll be better all-around results for society for the future.
And just more broadly, is that an accepted analogy and understanding of what trust is, Karina, or do you have to explain this to the respondents?
So we really do design the questions around a particular methodology of trust that we use as Edelman. So as I said, it is a proprietary tool for us. But effectively, what we're asking respondents is how much do they trust that institution to do the right thing? So it's really a sort of general understanding. The way that we interpret the results becomes a little bit more academic, but the way that we ask the questions is really, do you believe that this institution or this particular media channel or this particular way that a particular initiative is being run is in the best interest of doing the right thing. And that's the departure point for people, is how likely are they to feel that level of trust in their relationship with that particular institution.
Nikali, why is it important for us to look at levels of trust? And interestingly enough, this is something that we hear spoken quite a lot about. People express a view that they don't trust government, they don't trust the media, they don't trust, whether some multinational corporations. So the issue of trust is one that comes up quite often in our public discourse.
Thanks, Cathy. When we think about the challenges that we're experiencing in our country, from youth unemployment, poverty, inequality, and we think about what is it actually going to drive us forward, what's going to help us emerge from these challenges. One of the key drivers is innovation. And I think a key to ensuring that we innovate, that we produce new technologies, that we produce solutions that can address these challenges is collaboration. And I think trust underpins collaboration. We have to work together as government, as the private sector, as citizens, in order to emerge from the crisis we're currently experiencing. And really, trust is what underpins that.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, then Karina will run us through some of the findings of the latest trust barometer.
Yanga have a massive mission to dish out orders in Dar es Salaam against 2016 champions. However, Masandawana believe in their ability to succeed anywhere on African soil. This is the first leg quarter-final encounter of the CAF Champions League. Witness Africa's beautiful game. Young Africans versus Mamelodi Sundowns on Saturday 30 March at 8 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We're talking about trust and at least the measures of trust in South Africa based on the SA Trust Barometer 2024 done by Edelman Africa. So, Karina, I want you then to run us through some of the findings of the barometer for 2024. What is it saying about the levels of trust that we have, whether it's in government, in business, in the media?
Sure. Thanks, Cathy. So, look, I think just to start with maybe the global findings, and then I can give you a little bit more specific around South Africa, because largely these are shared results across the world. And these findings, I think, this year are really profound, particularly against the backdrop of what we're seeing in the world today. So global conflicts, the surge in AI, we have elections going on in 60 plus markets around the world. So innovation really plays a deeply important role. But what we're seeing is a real paradox at the heart of society, where we know that rapid innovation really offers the promise of what we're calling a sort of new era of economic prosperity. But instead of having that kind of net effect on people, all it's doing is it's running the risk of exacerbating trust issues, which further destabilizes society. So really, people are concerned based on the results that we're seeing that innovation is not being managed correctly in society. And that's contributing towards a decline in trust in those who are responsible for steering this change for us, which would be those four institutions. The key takeout really is that business is the most trusted institution and remains the most trusted institution for the last 3 years now. And it outpaces others on competence and ethics, which I mentioned were the two pillars of trust. For South Africa specifically, we see again business is the most trusted institution, and we've seen the surge in demand for a business-government partnership on innovation. This is really important to our respondents. 61% of them believe that that partnership between these two institutions particularly can lead to more trustworthy management of emerging technologies and societal changes. Further to that is the idea that out of business, obviously then comes this immense responsibility. Being so trusted is what do they do with that trust? So for us, the research is also telling us that CEOs as business leaders need to really take a stand on the societal issues that Nikki mentioned earlier as well. So really talking about what are the ethical concerns related to things like technologies, automation, job skills in the future. So it's crucial to be thinking about how those advancements are going to impact society in the future. And really, this is going to be about fostering a future where innovation promotes inclusivity and sustainability. And those are kind of the key takeouts of this year's trust.
I was quite fascinated by the title for this report, Karina, which is The Decline of Authority. Why that particular title for this report?
So the theme of this year's report is innovation in peril, and the decline of authority is really what's happening that is putting really this decline and this perilous feeling around innovation and this levels of distrust in innovation. It's really what we're seeing as people are really not trusting establishment leaders. They're not trusting traditional leaders, as I say, these four institutions in society, to tell them the truth, to be transparent, to manage the introduction of innovation into society. So they're really feeling, when people are feeling like they don't have leadership, they're looking around them going, who can lead me in this? Who's going to tell me the truth? How can I believe that these things are going to be good for me and they're going to advance my life and my family's life and our society's lives in the future? So really that's what we're seeing, and this innovation being in peril as a result of, as a consequence of this decline in authority, which is that shift away of authority that's now moving to more people, as they describe it, people like me. People want to hear more from their peers than they do from establishment leaders.
Nikki, what this is also doing is that it of course is showing that developing countries also seem to be doing much better when it comes to matters, when it comes to the question of trust.
I was quite interested to see in the Edelman Africa report that, South Africa almost compares with some of the developing countries with regards to some of the statistics. And I think what's really important for us is to remember that if we want to progress as a nation, it's really going to be important for us to look at reports like this, to understand what are our weaknesses, where are the gaps in terms of what we're actually trying to achieve from driving an innovation agenda, and how, as each of the stakeholders that are involved, from the media to government to private sector, how do we introspect, look at those issues and address them? Because as a collective, we're going to have to then rally together in order to actually get ourselves to compete with globally, actually. If we think of how technologies are advancing other countries in terms of their economy, we're going to have to actually rise from this peril that we're in at the moment.
And just touching on the issue of the economy, one of the big things that still seems to be a global concern, Karina, is the fears around people's economic stability, economic fortunes. Those remain the world over.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, Cathy, we see the developing markets being much more optimistic overall about the future in relation to the developed markets. So the developed markets like the US, Germany, France, UK are feeling very pessimistic about the future overall. So even though we have this optimism, we know the realities are that people are still facing these economic fears every day. And what's compounding those fears around things like job loss, inflation, etc., is what we call sort of existential fears around things like climate change, nuclear war, cyber attacks, information and disinformation. And that's really all compounding this feeling for people where they're feeling really anxious and they're not really sure who to believe and who to trust.
We'll continue the conversation in a moment. We're looking at the Alderman SA Trust Barometer 2024 and unpacking some of its findings. I wonder how much of it resonates with you, when you think about just what they're saying, right? That we are seeing declining levels of trust across institutions, whether it's business, NGOs, government, media. But I guess more concerning is that the trends, especially where the media and government are concerned, is that those have been on a downward trend over a couple of years. And so it does point to the fact that there are some serious questions that need to be asked and work that needs to be done to try and rebuild trust in these institutions. It's 11:30, time for the latest news headlines. We'll continue unpacking some of the findings of this research in a moment.
Thank you, Cathy. In your headlines, another 2 arrests have been made following the kidnapping of the 2 Mohammed cousins from Brits in the northwest. According to Provincial Police spokesperson Brigadier Sabata Mkhwabone, one of the suspects is a police sergeant attached to the Litlabile Detective Branch. Limpopo Transport Department has condemned the taxi-related killings in Zabediela near Leboakgomo. 4 people, including a passenger and a passerby, were killed in the shootings this morning. And the ANC's legal counsel has sought to highlight the historical links that have existed between the governing party and the Umkhonto weSizwe name. Advocate Gavin Marriott says the goodwill of the name is with the governing party. I'll have details on these and other stories at 12.
#SFM Talking Point.
You're listening to The Talking Point. We continue the conversation and we're looking at the Trust Barometer. That is the Edelman Trust Barometer 2024 and what it says about levels of trust. So our guests are Karina Krira, who's the CEO of Edelman Africa, and Nikoli Kubanali, who's the CEO of Mobile Applications Laboratory. So Karina, one of the things that I wanted to just note also coming out of the report is that we seem to have less levels of trust among people with low incomes across these institutions. Why do you think that is the case?
I think that's because those in lower income groups are really feeling it worse than anybody. So I really think when we look at the societal struggles that we have, when we think about how low income groups are so impacted by things like job loss, mostly by the inflationary increases and the economic pressures that exist around us, among many other challenges that people are struggling with every day. I think those are the least empowered and feel the least empowered to have their voices heard as well as part of that. So for me, it makes sense that the trust levels would be lower based on how they're feeling and how these results would resonate with them.
Nicole, there seems to also be a level of skepticism recorded in the report around innovation. Yes, we can talk about who people believe can better manage innovation, but just the idea of innovation seems to be also receiving a level of resistance in societies across the world.
I think anything that's new, anything that seems like it's going to cause change, and if I'm not clear of how that is going to affect me, what impact it's going to have in my life, I definitely will have these fears. And, with fear comes resistance to change. And so I think, just I suppose touching on your previous question in terms of lower income groups, etc., especially if I feel like something is being done to me or enforced upon me, if we think of things like artificial intelligence, and new technologies where I have limited understanding of what these are about, how it's going to affect me in my everyday life, I am going to have this fear. I am going to have low trust levels. And so I really think what's important, if we want to be driving innovation, if we're going to be looking at those who are going to be impacted by introducing these innovations, it's really important for us to embrace this whole notion of co-creation. How do we ensure that when we are designing these new technologies, when we're introducing it to society, there is this inclusive approach to how we research, develop, diffuse those technologies? Because if citizens are actually brought on board very early on in these processes and projects, new solutions being developed, there is buy-in upfront, there is walking along the journey in how it's developed. Are you including my voice? Are my concerns being heard? And so this whole approach to research and innovation, in the innovation space, we talk about the quadruple helix, where we consider what is academia saying, government, the private sector, but citizens who are ultimately going to be the users of these innovations, are going to be impacted by them. How do we really involve all aspects, all voices, different perspectives in order to build these solutions? And so I think if we really embrace this collaborative, inclusive approach, I think there will be lower resistance to adoption and use. And in that way, innovations are able to actually achieve the impact they are intended to do much sooner.
Karina, I want us to then look at the issue of science in society, because we are 2 years post the COVID-19 pandemic now, and we know the extent to which science was really scrutinized during the COVID-19 period, and I think there were lots of questions that scientists had to deal with, whether it's around the research they were conducting, vaccine development, etc., etc. And much of it, including the disinformation and the misinformation, still remains in society today. But in this report, you're saying that there is a reset for science in society.
Absolutely. I think based on the results that we're seeing, there is an expectation for scientists, those who have the science and are able to articulate it and bring it into society, are the most trusted now to be able to do that. And I think contextually, you're right. We saw how that was put under pressure with COVID, and people really weren't sure what to believe at all. But I think now, when we talk about, again, that dispersion of authority, because the balance of power has shifted in terms of where people are trusting the establishment leaders to give them the right information, they are definitely now feeling like, I feel like scientists are best positioned to give me this information. I think where the real challenge is that at the same time, people don't necessarily feel that scientists are best equipped to communicate what these new technologies are and what the impact is that they're going to have. And as Nikki mentioned, taking them on the journey. And I think that's the challenge. And I think that's the role then for business and government, who are much more accustomed to engaging, to communicating, to really work alongside the science community and interpret that, if you like, for society.
So when we look at it, the findings of this report, what should these sectors that are represented, what should we be taking out of it? Karina?
Well, really, I think the most important thing is that I think we know in South Africa, for example, there is a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes. We know the right conversations are being had. And it's difficult sometimes to have a priority on that when we're faced with other challenges that are conflicting with those messages. So I think it's really important that in these sectors, even though the sectors themselves are trusted, we have to build some trust capital in the actual technologies in the sector. Interestingly, when we looked at across 4 different sectors, when we were defining innovation for ourselves in this report, specifically being energy, healthcare, technology, food and beverage, we see that for energy, specifically green energy, although the sector may not be trusted, the energy sector in South Africa may not be trusted, there is a huge amount of trust already in green energy as a concept, as a science, and as an emerging technology that could really add a huge amount of value in people's lives. And I think that makes sense, given some of the energy challenges that we face as a country. For the other 3 sectors, technology, I think, has got quite a way to go in terms of really building trust in AI. We've seen the surge in AI in the last year, and people are grappling with it, but there's still a lot of work to be done around regulation, security, frameworks that really help people understand and be comfortable in this new space. And in terms of that healthcare space as well, as you said, the vaccines were also an interesting point for us as a country. A lot of sectors of society really just didn't feel that they could trust the information that they were getting in the healthcare sector. So that still remains an area for a lot of trust to be built. And then lastly, food and beverage, this idea of genetically modified foods, sustainable sourcing of food. There's a lot of work to be done in those sectors to really build back that trust capital.
Nikali, what do you think these institutions should be taking out of the research?
Yes. When I came across the trust report, for me, I really needed to go and unpack what does trust mean, And when I looked at it, it was about, I suppose, the aspects that Karina mentioned. It is about the competence. So when I have trust in somebody, I trust that you have the ability to perform. You have the right competence, you have the right qualifications, etc. There's this whole issue of transparency. And so when we look at it from the ethical perspective, just talking about artificial intelligence, we know that it's people have the fear of it overtaking jobs. There's all these large language models that are being developed, but what biases are being built into that? And then when we look at the issue of reliability in trust, are you going to deliver what you say you're going to deliver? And I think if we really look at trust from these aspects of competence, ethics, transparency, reliability, I think if we address those aspects, then we can actually focus on the issues of overwhelming information in this information age we're now living in. How do we actually simplify that, demystify these issues of, new technologies, green energy, climate change? I think everybody's just feeling really overwhelmed. And if we tackle these, tackle the elephant in the room, one bite at a time, simplify, ensure there's transparency and inclusivity, I think we will definitely then make a dent in terms of improving trust and driving innovation.
Is there a way, Karina, in which you measure the risks associated with doing nothing. So, despite what the research might be showing, even including on acceptance around innovation, what happens if industries continue to innovate, leave people behind, people feeling that whatever technology is being brought on is not a technology they understand, is not technology they necessarily find useful for them and the convenience of their lives? What is the risk of that?
Cathy, the risks are quite profound, and I think where we saw from 2020 when we did our trust report right after COVID, and we saw this emergence of a theme around a cycle of distrust that starts to build in society, particularly when there's a significant moment and a significant event like COVID-19 was for all of us. You really start to see the shifts there. And that's where we saw, as I say, the emergence of the cycle of distrust. And a cycle of distrust just starts to take us in a very negative direction if it's not managed. And over time, then what we find then is a polarized society. Last year, our Trust Barometer research showed us that South Africa was one of the most polarized countries in the world. And if we remain in that space, we're unable to collaborate, we're unable to bring things to the table, and we're unable to find solutions that are going to work for society. And ultimately, people want reassurance from institutions that future prosperity is guaranteed for them. They want to feel that confidence. So that's going to be really important. And that's really what's at stake, is if we continue to see this downward spiral. But I'm optimistic about it. I think there's still a lot of improvement in many areas. We know business has got a good trust capital, and I think there's a lot of pressure now sitting with the private sector, with the partnership, with government to really bring things to the table and go, right, what do we need to bring forth into society that's really going to put us on the upward trajectory?
All right. Well, let me thank you both for your time and your contribution to this conversation. Karina Creera is the CEO of Edelman Africa, and Nicole Kubanali is the CEO of a Mobile Applications Laboratory. That's where we leave it on the talking point for today. The show back with you again tomorrow between 9 and midday. Up next is the book reading.
Think bigger than just a banking partner. Think a team of specialized experts supporting you to make better financial decisions to enable your growth aspirations. Think a strategic partnership providing indispensable advice to help you make the right moves. Think bigger. Think Nedbank Commercial Banking. For more information, visit nedbank.co.za. See money differently. Nedbank. We're a licensed FSP and registered credit provider.
ES Tunis plan to disallow their visitors any breathing moment, but ASEC Mimosas remain extremely hungry for maximum points on the road. The North takes on the West. This is the first leg quarter-final battle of the CAF Champions League. Witness Africa's beautiful game. ES Tunis versus ASEC Mimosas on Saturday 30 March at 11 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. When TP Mazembe and Petro de Luanda collide, the vibration will shake the city of Lubumbashi in the DRC and the capital city of Angola. This is the first leg quarter-final contest of the CAF Champions League. Witness Africa's beautiful game. TP Mazembe FC versus Petro de Luanda FC on Saturday 30 March at 3 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
The book reading. Please note the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SFM presents another episode of Why Men Hate Women, written by Kopano Ratile.
I have said that mathematical reasoning may not be the best to use when we wish to understand love or violence or masculinity as psychosocial phenomena. I said also that if we were to unwrap an individual's declarations of love, we might find what I call unlove, feelings that are opposed to what we regard as love, even loathing and a belief that one is unlovable. Similarly, in almost the same moment, a person can be violent and feel tenderness towards the person against whom they are aggressing. What I see as abusive behavior, another person may see as loving concern. This indicates that there are conflicting ideas about love among people within one society, even one family. And contradiction is behind the fact that an adult male can feel like a man at one moment and less of a man at another, which points to not only his internal contradiction, but also the reality that masculinity itself may be inherently unstable. Is this not psychologizing the problem of men's violence against those they love? Yes, it can descend into psychological reductionism. That said, the history of the distribution of power in societies, which includes the social psychology of groups, is also the history of the internalization of power. Men's and women's needs for closeness to or segregationist attitudes towards others happens within a terrain scripted by power. There is no subjective life outside of power. Power even follows us into our bedrooms. It is an element in a feeling life. It shapes our political acts as much as our intimate behavior, what we do in our workplaces as much as in our homes. It may be of consequence to state explicitly that I take violence to be related to power, the will to control, and frustration of this desire to control other people and events. That is to say, violence is not only related to inflicting suffering. Yet I appreciate that some men can feel so unlovable that they wish to hurt those who show them love in order to communicate how unlovable they feel. For many of us, pausing to think critically about our power is not something that comes naturally. We feel, we react. In spite of the propensity to portray violent men as strangers, in particular in popular images of rape, we know that many women will experience violence from their intimate partners and from other men they know. It may be necessary to say this because there is already wide agreement with the sentiments. Nonetheless, to be in a relationship, as a Facebook status might indicate, can be far from saying one is being loved or loving someone. It is the same with being married. It does not necessarily mean being valued. Whereas I do use the term intimate partner, that term, important as it is in studies of men's violence towards their girlfriends and spouses, does not quite capture the relationship I set out to understand. I want to know about a relationship where the word love is said to be central. We also know that too many women who are abused by their partners will not leave their abusers. There are many explanations for this phenomenon offered in the literature, including the need for financial support, feelings of psychosocial insecurities, low self-esteem, desire for respectability, cultural expectations, psychological dependency, and the hope that the abuser will change. And we should note that it is not only poor women who do not leave their abusers. Well-educated, financially secure women find it difficult to acknowledge and leave an abusive relationship. Gender scholars and feminists have been central voices in the work of making it clear that violence against women is a social problem and not a private matter. The hashtags #MeToo, #MenAreTrash, and #TimeIsUp can be seen as iterations of the long-standing gender-critical and feminist efforts to give women a voice, to enable them to refuse to remain quiet about men's violence, abuse, gender discrimination, and sexual harassment. Needless to say, the work of conscientizing women to revolt against male oppression, discrimination, and harassment continues to be necessary. But to belabor the point, given the question of why some men had the women they love, or even greater significance is the work of shifting the psychologies of men and boys and undermining the structures that perpetuate patriarchal domination, even the apparently nice kind of patriarchy. Chapter 8. To love is to receive and to give. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said a childhood friend asked her for help regarding how to raise a baby girl as a feminist. The novelist said that while at first she was hesitant and felt it was a huge request, she decided to write a letter in response to her friend's question. The letter, published as Dear Ijiawele, takes the form of 15 suggestions. This is what she says in the 13th suggestion. Teach her that to love is not only to give but to also take. This is important because we give girls subtle cues about their lives. We teach girls that a large component of their ability to love is the ability to sacrifice themselves. We do not teach this to boys. Teach her that to love she must give of herself emotionally, but she must also expect to be given too. Who teaches girls and who teaches boys about love? We assume that it is parents. And we assume that fathers play a role in teaching boys love, which empirical reality proves to be highly improbable. Where love education happens, such education being scant, it is unlikely to be fathers who do it. According to the first State of South Africa's Fathers Report, published in 2018, only 34% of children lived with both their biological parents. The report argues that the most telling point about the lives of South Africa's children is the significant number who live with neither of their parents. While black children are the worst affected, even more staggering is that 2 in every 3 black children do not live with their biological fathers. The question that arises from that fact is, what if parents, and fathers in particular, are not available to teach their children? I've made it clear that boys need to be